Hey, y'all. Now, you know that I've been pretty vocal when I talk about black men being convicted and locked up and, unfair um, practices in the judicial system and things like that in violation of black men rights when I do speak on that. And so I came across this story out of NewsOne where this black man spent 8 years in prison with no conviction. Now, I always wonder, how does that happen where there's no conviction, but this person, this man, this individual, black man, has served 8 years in prison with no conviction? Now, the story reads as follows, and it says, we all know that being the only black person in a predominantly white space can put one in the spotlight and with the target on their back if anything goes wrong. The black man's name is Emanuel Fair, and it cost him more than 8 years of his life, which he spent in lockup without a single conviction. And now he's suing everyone involved with his imprisonment. Now, according to Rolling Stone, he attended a Halloween party at the Valley View Apartments in Redmond, Washington in 2008. And it was like, a small block party where, like, if you've been to a block party before. Matter of fact, I had a cousin when I was a teenager, and they used to throw them all the time, which was pretty cool. So they had a block party. It was a small block party. It wasn't a real big one. And it was a lot of residents. Numerous residents had their apartment doors open to party goers, so people could go in and out of the residents' apartments and things like that. And so he he actually was actually staying with a woman there. He was actually staying with this woman, but he really didn't know anyone at the party because he was actually new to that neighborhood, that area, to be honest with you. And he was a friend. He wasn't a resident, but he was a friend of this woman named Leslie Potts. And so he didn't know anyone else at the party, which he had no idea was taking place as he had just begun his stay at Potts' apartment. So a few of Potts' neighbors helped him pull together a costume. So he went as a construction worker and to celebrate the festivities. And so others who attended the party said he was relatively quiet, which would make sense. If you don't know anyone, you're going to be quiet. You may not be a person that's going to be real outgoing at a party, and you're the only black man there. You may not say anything, or even a black person there. Whether you're male or female, you may not say nothing. So he was referred to as the black guy. So no one really, I guess, got to know him, ask him what his name, go up to him. They just referred to him as the black guy, and he was only the only black guy there. Okay. And so that's exactly what made him, and here we go again, the one and only suspect arrested when 24-year-old software engineer Arpana Janaga, one of the party's hosts, was found beaten, sexually assaulted, and strangled to death in her apartment on November 1st of that year. Now, the lead detective in the case was a Brian Coate, and he reportedly looked through photos of the party when he noticed Fair, and he referred to as the only African American male at the party, which led Coate to feel he looked like an outsider. Well, he was an outsider because he was new, he didn't know anyone there, and he was the only black person. But if you ask me right away, that's almost like racial profiling, and there's some bias there too, but like the racial profiling, you know what I mean? Like, because you automatically is going to assume that this man committed a crime because he was the only black person there, and he looked out of place. He didn't look like he belonged. He was an outsider, and so that's what racial profiling is all about. Okay, and so being black makes one hyper visible when a crime has been committed, and that's sad to say that that's what happens most of the time. You are just living in your black skin, being black, and being racially profiled. So now you're you know black at a party. It's like partying while black, or and things like that. And so all that has to happen is white people seeing a black person and deciding they don't belong, and that's enough to make people suspicious. Okay, so it turned out that Fair did have a criminal record. Now he did have a past criminal record, but it was mostly juvenile offenses. but also a third-degree rape charge. He spent 3 years in prison for that. Now, he's already served his time for the rape charge, okay? But here we go again. So in that case, Fair had entered an Alford plea. And an Alford plea is where you accept the plea agreement while still maintaining your innocence. And that's a common tactic when you can't afford to go to trial. So he couldn't afford to go to trial. So he entered into an Alford plea, uh, still maintaining his innocence. And he spent 3 years in prison for that charge. Now, according to Rolling Stone, the account of Fair's case and investigation to Janaga's murder is based on more than 1,000 pages of case files and legal documents. They show that there was persuasive evidence against at least 6 other suspects that the detectives were investigating, but none of whom were black. Take a breath. And none of whom spent a day in jail for Janaga's murder. Fair's lawsuit claims the detectives on the case ignored and failed to gather evidence that did not align with their theory of the case. And you know that happens a lot. They just suppress evidence, they hide it, they don't present it, they destroy it. There's a lot of stuff that goes on to try to get a conviction. And it also alleges they treated Fair so differently than the white suspects that the treatment can only be viewed as racial discrimination. And also, the case files show breaches of protocol that span from careless errors. There was careless errors such as not training their detectives to change gloves between DNA samples and not securing key locations of the crime scene. You know, that right there is such a violation. Some people should lose their job over this, especially, and I don't promote that in people losing their job, but if you don't have enough sense to change gloves when you're checked between DNA samples, you don't deserve to be in the profession that you're in, because I mean, everyone should know you got to change your gloves in between samples. In between samples. Everybody knows, man, should know that, okay? I'll say should know that, okay? And they didn't secure the locations of the crime scene, no yellow tape. Come on, what's up with that? And then to call in a famous psychic medium to weigh in on the case. uh, those were protocol failures, you guys. And so, and women, because I don't want to offend anyone by saying you guys. So, the suit alleges, in concert with the detectives' apparent racial discrimination, deprived Emanuel Fair of his civil rights, of course, and demanded Arpana Janaga any chance at justice. So when they fail to do their job appropriately, then they're gonna deny the victim, any chance of justice when they fail to do their job. Because how can they catch the real criminal if they're not doing their job properly? They're not changing gloves between DNA samples. They're not securing, the they're not securing the location of the crime. So, you know, they are really doing even the victim an injustice. So they had never seen a worse case, says Corinne Seaburn, one of Fair's lawyers who specialized in civil rights cases, because they did violate his civil rights, and so there's very little justice left to savage. There is, however, a person trying to savage a life interrupted, trying to return to life after a decade. Now, he spent 8 years behind bars with this. It wasn't a conviction. And so he's trying to return to life after a decade in purgatory. Man, that's crazy. But thanks to a legal system that still won't concede it done anything wrong. And if you've been following me, I did a video some time ago about how the judicial system never admits when they're wrong. The federal government never admits when they do things wrong. They know when they've done wrong, but they don't ever admit it. If you notice that, they won't admit it. They won't admit it. And they say these people really called in a psychic. So investigators found Farrah's DNA in Janaga's apartment. Well, yeah, because if he went in there to use the restroom to get food, she was one of the hosts, to get a drink, guess what? Yes, his DNA is going to be in there. But guess what? There was dozens of other people that had been in and out of her apartment as well. So that didn't mean anything to them. I mean, he wasn't the only one that, was in her apartment. Okay. But investigators also found a match on Janaga's robe and a roll of duct tape reportedly used to gag her. But guess what? Guess what? It didn't match Fair. It didn't match his DNA. It wasn't on there. It didn't match Fair was found on a bruise on Janaga's wrist and on a tampon that had been removed from her body before her death. But it didn't match his. And it says police files show that there are multiple other men in Janaga's life that had as much, if not more, evidence against them. So no disrespect to the victim, Miss Janaga, but they said there were other men in her life. And they had evidence against them. But again, they only held Mr. Fair for 8 years. He was the only man that was arrested. And they say the black guy who didn't belong. So while Fair, who had been charged with first-degree murder, was being held in King County Jail on a 7-figure bail his family couldn't afford. 7-figure bail. And he had his first trial in 2017. What, 5 years ago? 2017? So the jury deadlocked and he was tried again in 2019. 3 years later. 2 years later, but it's now 3 years because we're in 22, but in 2019, so 3 years ago, 3 years ago, a jury found him not guilty. And that was in 2019. So basically, this was a crime where there were no witnesses, no confessions, and ultimately no justice for Janaga. Rest in peace, this woman, this victim. No justice for her. No justice for her because of the sloppy job that the detectives did. They didn't do their job. So where will they be held accountable for not doing their job correctly? Are they being held accountable? You know what I'm saying? Are they, did they get suspended? Are they getting retrained or trained? Because it says they weren't trained. Who is their supervisor and who is responsible for the training? There's a lot of questions that need to be answered for holding this man in jail for 8 years with no conviction and no evidence. That's crazy. And so now Fair wants everyone in his imprisonment to say, I'm sorry, with their wallets. And you know what? It's still a question to other people. Not necessarily because we know, but it says if anyone ever wondered why Black people avoid non-Black spaces, this is why. Because you go somewhere, you're going to be the one that's suspected, suspicion, you're going to be looked at, and they're going to refer to you as the Black man, the Black guy, the only Black man. Because that's what they refer to him, but he has a name, though. It's Emanuel Fair, serving 8 years in prison with no conviction and no evidence tied to him. So, Mr. Fair, I wish you well in your legal endeavors, that God will restore everything that they took from you. Restore everything that you have lost. Because you can't get back that time. You won't, and once they convict you, that sticks with you. Even if you are found not guilty, it sticks with you. So I pray for you. And I pray that you will get everything that you need and be able to start your life back up after this devastating, interruption, disruption in your life. So you all, thank you for tuning in. Please like, share, and subscribe to the channel. And please leave your respectful comments below. Let me know what you think about this. No evidence, no conviction. And God bless you all. Bye.